You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome back to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I must be Bill Thomas.
And we are reporting from quarantine. I'm quarantined here in Virginia in my home. Bill is quarantined in beautiful Connecticut in his much larger and much nicer home.
Yeah, but it snows here.
It has not snowed here this winter.
Oh, you're kidding.
Oh, no, wait. We had one day. We had one day where it snowed, actually, but that was it. It's been a very mild winter.
Well, we had it was cold and snowy, quite cold and snowy, like in November, December. And then the second half of the winter here, January, February, March, it's been kind of dry. We had snow on, must have been Monday, but today it went up to 50 and the snow started to melt.
We've had some gloomy and gray days. Tomorrow promises to be very nice. At least that's what the weatherman says. So the best way to keep sane during quarantine, I have found, is to try to get outside and take a walk or a hike or a bike or something.
Yes.
Because being inside all the time is not good for anybody.
No. And then, of course, I've got my, once a week visit to the grocery store. And, this is a small town, so we have to go to the post office. We cut that down to 3 days a week instead of 6. The post office is like 100 yards away. We do have to go to the dump once a week. You sort of shrink your circle in quite a bit so that I'm just seeing my partner Pamela, our dog Oliver, and talking to everybody else electronically.
Yeah, our schools have closed, and we had our first faculty meeting via Teams today. And so 90 people all trying to have a faculty meeting on Teams.
How did that go?
Actually, it went really well once everybody learned how to mute their microphones.
Oh, yeah. This is like on all the, I've done a lot of conference calls for business, and there's a lot of, you need to mute your phone. And then there's I think you need to unmute your phone if you want to make a point.
This is really, it's a brave new world for a lot of people, for education to have to go completely virtual in the amount of time that it has taken for the virus to sort of explode. This is completely unforeseen. This is, it's a very, very, very steep learning curve. And so we are doing the best we can, like as teachers, to keep the learning happening for our kids, but it is hard.
Yeah.
Because we're having to reinvent what education looks like right now in the middle of a global pandemic.
You guys are kind of discovering how to do distance learning with hundreds of students all at the same time.
Yeah, and not every student has access to the internet or technology. As much as we would hope that is true in this day and age, it is not so. So we're having to figure out, how do we make things equitable? How does everybody have access? Oh, it's crazy. It's like balancing a tightrope.
So something we wanted to tell you about, the Colonial Parkway Murders is going to be featured on the Mel Robbins Show, which is a daytime talk show shot in New York City. Several months ago, this would have been back in December, we traveled to New York City and shot an episode with Mel Robbins, who's absolutely wonderful. And she hosted Joyce Call Canada, her brother Doug Call, Jeanette Edwards Santiago, and me, Bill Thomas. And the four of us had a chance to spend about an hour with her. Mel talked to us about the impact that the Colonial Parkway murders and this unsolved case, which has stretched on for more than 30 years, has had on us. And so I think it's a very interesting episode. They were absolutely wonderful. It feels like a long time ago now that we shot the show. And of course, this was back when, you used to travel, remember? And you could go
back
places,
in those days.
Leave your house, that kind of thing. It's supposed to be on today, Monday, March 30th, but check your local listings. The show is on different stations in different cities at different times. So you're looking for the Mel Robbins show, and the topic, of course, is the Colonial Parkway murders. So we hope you'll look for it, and you should be able to find it via your local television outlets as well as online sometime around the same time as you hear our voices on this podcast. Now,
the other piece that we want to bring up for our listeners, for those of you who had already planned on going to CrimeCon, you'll know this already, but CrimeCon has been rescheduled, although I think they rescheduled it for the best time possible, which is over Halloween weekend.
Should be fun.
It's going to be amazing. And so while we're disappointed that we can't have CrimeCon right this second, I'm actually also kind of glad we're not having CrimeCon right this second. I think I would rather go to the True Crime Convention over Halloween weekend. It's going to be a lot more fun, I think, and maybe a little bit spookier and a little bit crazier.
Well, and hopefully things will have settled down by then, and we won't be practicing as much social distancing, and heck, we might even be free to travel.
I certainly hope that will be the case. But we are definitely looking forward to seeing all of you at rescheduled CrimeCon on October 30th, 31st, and November 1st in sunny Orlando, Florida.
This week, our guest is former FBI profiler Jim Fitzgerald. I think it's a fascinating conversation. We won't give you a complete intro because we cover that in a minute. It's going to end up being a two-parter, and this will be the first part, and I think you should enjoy it.
Jim Fitzgerald is one of our favorite guests, and we look forward to bringing you more with Fitz in future episodes. So listen, and thanks so very much for listening to us and tuning in. Stay safe and stay healthy. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. This is Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
Today we are talking with retired supervisory special agent James R. Fitzgerald. He is also a profiler and a forensic linguist. Fitz, thank you so much for joining us on Mind Over Murder.
It's been great to be here. Bill, nice to be with you again, and I'm looking forward to it today.
So let's see if the technology cooperates. We're in 3 different locations. We're practicing social distancing, and we're managing to pull this thing off with the help of very expensive technology.
And like you said, let's hope this actually works today. Fitz, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, please, in the FBI?
Well, as you may know, people have asked me that same question for 20 plus years, and I decided in the last 5 years to write 3 books so far about my life. So, yeah, I grew up in Philadelphia, went to Penn State University, the criminal justice degree, became a store detective first in Philadelphia, downtown big department store, joined the Bensalem Police Department in 1976. Suburban Philly, 11 years there, detective sergeant, patrol sergeant, all that stuff. 1987, it was time for a change, joined the FBI, went through the academy, met Jim Clemente the first day of the academy. I know he's a friend of the show and both of you guys, and my good friend to this day. First 7 years, New York City, and promoted in 95 to the profiling unit in Quantico. Went through 12 weeks of specialized training there in behavioral analysis and assessment and threat assessment and a little bit of language science and, of course, crime scene interpretation, all those things. Take about a 2-week vacation. They call me on vacation. Hey, Fitz, I know you're a brand new profiler, but the Unabomber task force is really kicking in. They want a behavioralist out there. Do you think you want to go? And as I learned in the FBI after 7 years, when a boss asks you if you think you want to do something, that's kind of an order. But they're polite about it. A little different than the military, perhaps. I said, San Francisco for how long? Oh, just 30 days, 30 days. Yeah, I guess I can do that. I've never been to San Francisco before. So, however it turned out, the manifesto had just been published. I know your listeners and you guys have watched Manhunt Unabomber, and they maybe read my 3rd book. So they know how that all played out. That's not what we're talking about today, but it was really a busy time in the Unabomber case. And after a 17-year investigation with this unknown serial bomber, after I showed up 9 months later, the case was solved because of great teamwork, not just me. But I was very happy to have handled the language analysis in that case. And then back to Quantico and finished up my career the next 10 years or so as a profiler, a forensic linguist. Got a couple master's degrees there, one from Villanova when I was a police officer, one from Georgetown when I was in the FBI, the latter in linguistics, former in psychology. Retired in 2007 and been in the private sector since then, doing TV work, media work, cable news when they need me. Like I said, wrote a few books, A Journey to the Center of the Mind. And every once in a while, I talk to good friends like Bill and Kristin and their new podcast, Mind Over Murder. Here we are today. So you asked a pretty simple question, Kristin, and you got a long-winded answer. I hope that's okay, though.
It's totally fine.
Well, and you're being incredibly modest as always, Fitz. First of all, you've done 3 books, a fascinating series called Journey to the Center of the Mind, Book 1, Book 2, and Book 3. You've had an amazing career, and you're a great storyteller. I know we were teasing you off mic a minute ago. These read like novels. You lay out an amazing story and people get really pulled in, and you're able to give them insight into what, in many cases are solved cases, including cases like the Unabomber that people are very familiar with. It really is a fascinating series. Are you going to work on a 4th book for the Journey to the Center of the Mind series?
Yeah, believe it or not, I was going to write one book from, childhood through police department, through FBI. But I started writing about childhood and fun things and crazy things that happened then, which in some interesting ways aren't ahead to my future. And of course, I do that in my first book. The first book starts out with me as a 6-year-old investigating my own stolen bike. I never made an arrest in that case, but I did recover the bike after doing some pretty good investigative work. So maybe that was a portending of my future career there. And just running into different kinds of people, doing some things right, doing some things wrong. And then my second, I said, all right, that's one book. It ended with me graduating the Pennsylvania State Police Academy as a Ben Salem Township police officer. Then I made all of book 2, my police career, which was interesting. A lot of interesting arrests and car chases and gunplay and all that kind of stuff. A lot of politics in the middle of it. And then the last couple chapters is me moving ahead into the FBI and listing how that process works. And book 3 starts out with me at the FBI Academy, takes the reader all the way through my New York career, 7 years, a lot of interesting cases there. We're going to talk about one in a few minutes, I know. And then it ends with a long chapter on the Unabomber case. So yes, 4th book will be the remaining 10 years or so in my FBI career. And probably the last third will be my 12 years now in chosen retirement. It really hasn't been between TV work, media work, getting involved with a mini-series, and starting my own company and working some pretty interesting cases, still as a profiler and a forensic linguist. And some of these, which are now, public matters, and I can discuss them. So that'll be in book 4, which will come out sometime in 2021. Just not sure exactly when yet. This quarantine goes on much longer. It may give me more time to write. So, but I'm not hoping it goes on much longer. I'd rather everybody get out and start living their lives again. So yeah, so 3 books out there, all on Amazon, and there's ebooks and of course the traditional books. Let me just throw real quick in, if anybody is into audiobooks, you can get my 3rd book for free now by going to a website, freeaudiobookcodes.com, freeaudiobookcodes.com, one word, and just search A Journey to the Center of the Mind, my name, whatever, and there's a code, you type it in, and you wind up getting that audiobook for free. So be my guest, folks, check it out, and hopefully, like Bill and Kristin said, you'll enjoy my writing style and anecdotes I had to share, and you'll know a little bit more what it's like to be a law enforcement officer professionally, but also on a personal side too. I try to weave some of those stories in to make us, because we are human beings, we're not just badge and gun carriers and robots that go out and arrest people. We also have lives we live, and I share a little bit of that in there too. But of course, most of it is the cops and robber stuff, and me arresting bad guys, or at least trying to.
In addition to the audiobook you're telling us about, you were also involved in a really excellent Audible presentation earlier in the year called Call Me God. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, please?
And that's when I last saw you, Kristin, I think, in Washington, D.C. Call Me God is an audio series all about the D.C. sniper case, because in the letters that they wrote, we didn't know they at first, thought maybe one person, but it was 2, written to the media. They used the term "Call Me God." Actually, these letters were left as scene for law enforcement. So, yeah, I was involved with my good friend Jim Clemente, his brother Tim, a few other folks they went out and interviewed. And we spent a number of hours actually in the studio putting together this audio, not really a book, but audio entity, I call it. And it's really going over very well. Great reviews. I was glad to be a part of it. And like with any book I've written or talk I give, and like what we're doing right now, I just tell it as it is. And that's certainly what we did in the DC sniper case. The Clementi brothers and I was involved in this case on multiple levels. We had to fight some of the administration and some of the politics and the whole thing, but we got through, and eventually we were part of the team that wound up arresting Mohammed and Malvo. We weren't on the scene, but we were, part of the investigative team that put everything together, and luckily they were finally apprehended when they were, and Mohammed is no longer with us, receiving the death penalty, and Malvo is still in prison with a very interesting Supreme Court decision, which has to be made about whether juvenile sentenced to life in prison, if that's a legal sentence. So it's possible that the remaining DC sniper could be out someday. We'll see how that goes.
How old was Malvo at the time of his arrest?
I believe he was 17. He may have been 16 during some of the shootings, or at least when they started, but he was 17. So he was definitely a juvenile. Yeah, the federal system is not really designed for juvenile adjudication. Obviously, state and local jurisdictions have all kinds of juvenile court and, legal aspects to it, but really not the federal government. So they had to... So they really charged him as an adult is what they did, and put him through the system accordingly. But there are some people fighting, whether people under 18 years of age get the death penalty. I'm sorry, that would never happen. But if they get life in prison, is that fair as opposed to someone who's 50 and gets life in prison? So that's going to be decided at some point by the Supreme Court, and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, not making an argument here at all, but there has been a tendency, from what I've read, for juveniles a little below 18 to be charged as adults in recent years, particularly where we've had people charged with really heinous crimes like the DC sniper case. And so this court case in the Supreme Court could be very far-reaching, could it not?
Well, certainly for federal crimes and how it would affect state crimes, it may just, carry through to that also. I don't think it would change the rulings. A juvenile could conceivably still be charged as an adult, and he can get, 10 to 20 years in prison or something like that for a crime. I think the issue now is life sentences, because life is, in fact, well, it's supposed to be life. In some states, you can get out, in 30 or 35 years. That's why you see some sentences of life plus 100 years. You'll see life with no possibility of parole. I'm not sure exactly what Malvo got in that regard. I believe in the federal system, life is, in fact, you stay in prison till you die. Maybe someone could correct me on that, but either way, you see the arguments more in the different state sentencing guidelines around the country. But definitely the Supreme Court will make some decisions on this, and we'll see where it takes us. And we wonder if someone like Malvo could, in fact, be reacclimated to society, and hopefully without the influence of someone like John Mohammed, he wouldn't pick up and start doing what he did before. But it's about retribution. Society wants people to suffer for really bad crimes. But is it also about reformation or somehow, person being fixed and being made into another productive member of society, or at least a neutral member of society where they're not going to go out and kill someone? So again, that's the argument going back and forth. It's been out there for decades, if not centuries, about, in various prison reform arguments and on multiple continents, not just here. We'll see where it goes, and maybe we can do a whole separate show on that. Bring a lawyer or two in and see get some different kinds of arguments. But he killed 10 people. He pulled the trigger. He wasn't 7 years old. He was 17, and he certainly had some level of awareness of what he was doing, the difference with right and wrong. But was he overly influenced by an adult male? Was he even being sexually violated by an adult male? Do all these factors kick in as mitigating circumstances in terms of lessening his sentence? Again, that's going to be argued by lawyers in front of the Supreme Court, and we'll see where it goes.
It's a very, very interesting case. Hey, a quick question. I know that Kristin had the privilege of seeing you make a live appearance with the Clementi brothers and other folks that worked on the case. In the situation where you're recording an audio series like Call Me God, are you ever in the same room, or does each person record their portion of the reading, if you will, separately, and then it's stitched together by your editors? Are you ever together?
The answer is yes to both. So I spent some private time in a studio with a producer asking me questions. Actually, my very first time, I was in a studio by myself with people calling in from Los Angeles. I'm on the East Coast, and they were asking me questions over the phone, but I would answer them in a recorded, higher tech version of my response. So that would ultimately go onto the audio entity, as I call it. The last time we recorded, it was me in the studio on a Thursday by myself with the producer and the sound editor, et cetera. And then that Friday, it was nice seeing Jim Clemente again. And we were in the studio at the same time. And I believe there are parts of the Call Me God where it's actually Jim and I having a conversation back and forth and discussing the case and different things we did time and in terms of helping to solve it. It covered all those aspects, Bill, and I think that's what makes Call Me God so successful, because you have an individual talking in a studio. I think they did some live, meaning I should say on-site interviews where I think Jim and Tim may have actually been at the scene of some of the shootings, at least for a few minutes of that, including with some witnesses they talked to, and then other times in the studio with other people, like with me and Jim, and it all worked out well.
It was an excellent audio presentation. I've listened to it 3 times so far. It's truly, truly excellent, largely because I am very, very much a Jim Clemente fangirl and a Jim Fitzgerald fangirl as well, too. So. Well, and before we pivot away and into the case that we're going to be talking about, I do want to make sure that you cover a little bit about the work that you've done in Hollywood, both on Criminal Minds and on Manhunt Unabomber. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
So yeah, in my, I think it was June of 2007, I was in LA for something with Jim Clemente. We were both still in the FBI, and we were kind of informally helping the Criminal Minds people as kind of tech advisors. We weren't getting paid. We weren't on any salary or anything like that, but just the writers would call us. We'd answer some questions for them about how the real BAU ran, and then how their TV version of it ran, and they really liked hearing us. Jim became friends with one of the actors, and next thing you know, we're at dinner one night in June, and the showrunner looks over to me. We're all with their wives. They had their wives, and there's about maybe 10 of us at the table, and he just said, "Fitz, when are you retiring?" I said, "I'm retiring in November. We need a tech advisor. Are you interested in coming on board? We'll pay you this much per episode." I think I can do that. Sure. Thanks for asking. So
you said,
I didn't even have to move to.
Let me think about that for half a second.
Well, that's exactly what I did. And I said, I'm not going to move to LA. I want to, spend time with my kids and everything. And no problem. You can do it on the phone, by email, Skype, whatever. So all those things were made. I still did a bunch of trips back and forth to the studio. I get to know all the writers, met all the actors, of course. And Jim had become friends with Mandy Patinkin because they were both cancer survivors. Luckily, they're still surviving and they're still with us. And because people may forget, if you only watch the later seasons of Criminal Minds, that Mandy was there in the first 2 seasons. And he and Jim really hit it off. And next thing you know, he's calling Jim, he's calling me, and the writers are calling me. So for seasons 3 and 4, I was the official technical advisor on the show. Jim and I had a handshake agreement when he retired in 2009. He was going to move to LA and take over. Said, fine, no problem. I still helped him out. I still did some special things with the writers. I'd fly out every once in a while when they were breaking stories. So that was Criminal Minds. We did a show called Killer Profile for A&E. I think we only did about 8 episodes of that, but it's still pretty well received. I still get emails about it and all. I did a show called Notorious for Reals. There's a number of other guest appearances in there on shows. But then, the granddaddy of them all was, for me, certainly, was the miniseries Manhunt Unabomber. I was the, what was my first title, but the story consultant. And it was Jim Clemente and another Hollywood writer, Tony Gittleson, that were involved in it. They were the main writers, and they pitched it to Discovery. They loved it. They loved no one ever told kind of the Fitz story before with the language and some of the pushback I had from some of the people. It wasn't quite as illustrated in the series. I basically got along with my bosses on the UTF, Unabomber Task Force, but Hollywood likes to over dramatize some things. So they pitched it, and next thing you know, that was in about 2015, we signed our contracts, and between they wrote it mostly through 16, shot it in early 17, all in Atlanta. I went on the set and finally met Sam Worthington and of course the other actors who were involved in the show, and all good stuff. And I went to the red carpet parties, one in New York for the premiere, then again in LA a week later. And I actually walked the red carpet. That was pretty cool. And people yelling questions at me and the light bulbs flashing. And just like you see on TV, and here that was me and the media stuff we did afterwards. So the NPR interviews and a bunch of other media interviews. And yeah, it was quite the experience. I'm still getting requests from around the world because now it's on Netflix, of course, and then in every country worldwide. Maybe more people will be watching it over the next few weeks since we're locked indoors. And I get the emails will be coming in, and people wanted me to send them signed books and all, which I'll gladly do. You can go on my website, jamesrfitzgerald.com, and find out how to contact me for signed books and all. So yeah, it was a great experience. There's a couple old timer agents that somehow didn't realize it wasn't a documentary, and hey, you didn't mention Joe Smith. He showed up one day and did this. And I would respond at first by email. Well, they can't put every single agent who did something into the series. And some guys were coming out. They did nothing in the real case, but they somehow thought they wanted to. They should have some kind of a part in the miniseries. And one guy wrote a couple of articles. He's just a frustrated old retired agent. I finally wound, and the Discovery people said, if you respond to people like this, you're only going to give them credibility and give them more notice. So I didn't respond the first or second article. Finally, I did. In, I think, January of 2018, I wrote a scathing rebuttal to this guy, and he kind of shut up after that and went away. But there's always a dark side to a positive thing, and but on the whole, it's been very positive. My goal all along in that series was to make the FBI look good. Yeah, there was some infighting on the series. People didn't always get along, but the FBI got the job done. And I knew back then, the FBI was taking some hits, quite frankly, some of it deservedly so at the very top. And I wanted a show that presented FBI agents, again, not agreeing all the time, to like everybody all the time, but getting the job done to save lives, which is exactly what we did at the UTF. And we finally made our case, in April of '96, when we had the evidence put together to get the search warrant for Kaczynski's cabin. And if you watched the series, read my books, or know a little bit about history, you'll know what happened after that.
Was there any chance that some of this was driven by jealousy because Sam Worthington played you in the series? I mean, what does it feel like to be told that, and Sam Worthington's going to play you in the fictional version of Fitz?
Well, that's a good question, because there were a number of actors, and I won't mention their names, but a number of names came up beforehand in the casting. And okay, that's interesting. And, really? Him? Okay. So they mentioned Sam Worthington, and I said, that sounds, there was an email. No, it was a call. The director gave me a call. And I knew the director pretty well. And back then, Sam Worthington wasn't the name that just rang off that I knew. I just couldn't place it. And a lot of people said the same thing. And then the director played a little game with me. He said, all right, Fitz. I'm Fitz to everybody, of course. And they said, here's who is playing you. He was in the highest grossing picture of all time, motion picture, movie, whatever. I said, okay, that's good news. But so of course, Titanic first came to mind.
Right.
No, it's not Leonardo. It's not, who else was in the movie? No. But then it turns out, as maybe and your listeners will know at this point, it was Avatar.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I guess, the early, 2010-ish or so, whatever that came out, maybe before that even. And that is the highest grossing movie to this day. I had not watched it up to that point in time. So I did make sure I got a hold of it. And Sam was great in it. There's like a digital version of him in it, but there's also plenty of live action with him in it. And I complimented him when I first met him. Well, a couple things. I go to the studio that day, and this was about April of 2017 in Atlanta, and I'm watching him on a monitor, like about 50 feet from where he's actually acting out his scene. And he did the same scene over. If anyone's ever watched how a TV show or movie is made, they do the same scene over and over and over. So I watched like 2 separate scenes about 10 different times each. And finally, he breaks, and he's trying to sound like me, kind of like Philadelphia dialect, but certainly American English. He finally comes over to the director. Hey, Jim, this is Sam. Sam, this is Fitz. And he just looks up to me and goes, "Good day, mate. How are you?" In his Australian, dialect. And I was kind of surprised because I've heard some actors will stay in character the whole time. And I think the guy that played House, I forget his name, he was a doctor, but he's an Australian actor. And they said, and the director of Manhunt, he also directed him in that show. And he said, he would come into work every morning, put on talk radio, and while he's driving into work in LA, wherever, this is the House actor, by the way, he would start practicing his American English, and the whole time on set, lunchtime, breaks, he would keep in his American dialect. Here comes Sam. He walks up, "Good day, mate." And I said, "Oh, okay, cool, Sam." And and we had exchanged emails before that, emails back and forth. We had not talked on the phone, but a number of emails. He asked me a lot of questions. I sent him a bunch of links to interviews I had done. Not only
interesting.
Podcasts, but
so he had actually,
he
studied you.
He did. And I wasn't sure, would he want to hang out with me for a month, which was a little bit weird, but, cause I was out of the FBI, and it's sometimes what I do is boring. You sit there, either I'm writing a book or I'm working a case, and, there's only so much, but I would have, shown him as much of Fitz as I could in a acting type of sense. So lots of emails, and I sent him links. He watched every interview he can get a hand on. I'd done a 5-hour course for the California University of Pennsylvania in forensic linguistics. He watched that. So he comes up to me, quick introduction. He said, "Hey, I just want you to know," I'm not going to try to mimic Australian English, but he would say, in his dialect, "I want you to know I'm really trying hard to capture your essence. I appreciate the email answers you gave me. I watched all your interviews." And of course, I was watching him on the monitor before then, so I thought I'd play a little game. "Sam, I appreciate that. I think on the whole, you're doing a really good job. I do have one major problem, though, with how you're portraying me."
Uh-oh.
And he literally takes like a step back. And
Uh-oh.
the director is like looking at me, and they've already shot half the series at this point. And they're thinking it's something major. There's some way that he's not presenting himself. And I said, he said, "Well, what's that, mate?" And I said, "Sam," and I used my hand to point to his weapon, which he was carrying on his right side, his handgun, because FBI agents carry handguns, of course, and his wasn't a real weapon, but it looked pretty good. I said, "Sam, you have it on the right side. I'm a lefty." And for a second, he just stares at me. He looks at the director. "Oh, mate, I have to write too much on the blackboard and on the whiteboard, and I couldn't fake it with my left hand. So we decided to just because I am right-handed, use my right hand." I said, "Sam, I'm kidding you. It's not that big of a deal. I'm okay with that. You're doing great otherwise." But the other thing I did compliment him on, I said, "I watched Avatar." This is after a little bit of conversation. And I complimented him on, if anyone's seen it, they know his character is in a wheelchair.
Right.
And he has to move from the wheelchair onto like this cot they put him on when they take him into this dream state, whatever it is. But I had a brother-in-law, he's now deceased, but he was in a car accident years ago, and he was in a wheelchair. And I used to help him. I used to watch him. And I really knew some of the methods that he used and how he would kind of move his legs. And I complimented Sam, said, "You've done your share of research about your avatar role, because you did a great job with getting in and out of your chair and how you would move your legs." And he said, "Thank you. I did do some work with some handicapped people and in wheelchairs," and he appreciated that. So I met him a few times at these red carpet events and afterwards, and a very nice guy, kind of quiet, kind of humble. And he complimented me on stage a few times. They did some roundtable discussions. So I felt honored by that. And I think he's making Avatar 2 now, and we haven't really seen him do too much lately. So but I think he'll come out with a bang in that movie when it's finally released.
Well, let's go ahead and pivot into the case that I know you wanted to talk about. And this is from Journey to the Center of the Mind, Book 3. And so anybody who has the book and is interested in the case that we're talking about, it's chapter 16, correct, Fitz?
That's right. It is chapter 16. And it's also I had to cut a little bit out of the audiobook, but I made sure to keep this chapter also in the audiobook.
This is an absolutely fascinating case. If you can just kind of place us in time, where were you at this point in your career? And then tell us a little bit about this case. This is so interesting.
soon as I got to New York out of the FBI Academy, they put me on the bank robbery squad. It was a task force, actually, of FBI agents and NYPD detectives. And it was very hard to get on. And you really had to be, you had to put your time in on some other types of squads and units in the New York office. By the way, the New York office is the biggest office in the FBI. 10% of all the FBI work in New York, be it agents, be it analysts, be it support personnel. I think there are like 1,200 FBI agents alone in New York and about 1,200 support people. So it's a very big office. And when I started there in February of '88, there were a lot of bank robberies happening, about 400 a year. I would do all 5 boroughs in one day, doing different bank robberies in each. I mean, different people, whether even the same team. So anyway, here's where I am. I'm on the bank robbery squad. I'm working different types of cases. I also work like extortions and kidnappings and various threats with my colleagues. So that's kind of the squad I was on. There was probably a dozen FBI agents, a dozen NYP detectives, and we got along great. We worked together well. Here, through a friend of another agent, somebody said they wanted to talk to an FBI agent because they have information about a serial killer. And this is how this whole started. And this went over a course of a few months when they would be in town. They didn't live in New York. And it was a woman, I found out, in her late 20s. I didn't know anything more about it. Finally, in a certain part of 1991, we set up for an interview. It was the fall of that year. We brought her in, and I sat in the room with another agent. Just to back up a second, there was a team of bank robbers that my squad was looking at the time. They thought they were going to hit over in Brooklyn one of these days. They didn't quite have enough to make we didn't have enough to make an arrest, but they had some cars and they had some identifications. So about 8 of my squad members were sitting in Brooklyn, 2 per car and 4 cars, watching this team. They were hoping they would get together and pull a robbery and there'd be an arrest, or at least we had more information about them. So keep that in mind because we're going to come back to that. So I have this interview finally set up at 1:00 and this woman comes in. I have another agent in the room with me. We sit down and she gives me all these caveats that she's very nervous. She's never told anybody about this before. She's afraid. I'm doing my best to comfort her. I'm, a few years older than her, but not a whole lot. She's married. She's a professional woman, the graduate degree, attractive, well-dressed woman. And she was in town visiting someone. And this is when it worked out. She wanted to talk to the FBI about something. So I really had no idea what I was getting into. This could have been over in 10 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, who knew? Within 10 minutes, she started laying out to me that her father was a serial killer and that she experienced certain things as a young child. Her parents were divorced and they lived in upstate New York in the Albany area. And by the way, I'm going to change some names and some locations. Every time an FBI agent or any FBI person writes a book, it has to get pre-approved through a whole unit at FBI headquarters. So they insisted, of course, I change some names, which I was all along, but they also insisted I even change some cities. So everything I'm saying here and what I wrote in the book, it did happen in New York State, but I just moved some of the cities around to sort of protect the innocent or quasi-innocent, as you'll see. So, but she grew up, we'll say, in the Albany area, and she starts relating these stories. Her dad would pick her up. He would forbid her to go down into the basement in this single home that kind of stood on its own somewhere, neighbors not too close. And basically she snuck down there one day. She thinks she was around 6 years of age. This would have been in the late 60s, doing the math, 68, 69, in that ballpark. And she went down there once, and there was an adult woman, naked, tied with or fastened with chains to the wall, with blood coming out of her mouth and with duct tape over her mouth, but she could still see the blood, and just like imploring with her eyes for the little girl to help her. And this little girl, and we'll call her Laura Crane, not her real name, but she saw this and couldn't believe what she saw. And she was about to go back upstairs because she knew she was forbidden to go there. Dad was outside doing something. Dad caught her and brought her back downstairs and proceeded to torture the woman in front of the little girl, and including a decapitation where the head was put on the lap of the little girl. Now, remember, I'm sitting in a room taking notes with my yellow legal pad, listening to all of this, and I think I'm I'm hearing an audio version of a Stephen King novel or something. It's so graphic, and she is so sincere, looking at me in the eye. She's welling up a bit. There's no hesitation. The other agent is sort of asking some questions, and I'm asking questions. We take her back to what she said 10 minutes ago. She repeated it exactly. We got a description of this woman. It turns out the father punished her for that, but then turns out on subsequent visits, there were other women tied up in the basement. The father let her come down, not so much participate in any type of, torture or the murder of these women, but she would certainly observe it.
The parents are divorced at this point, correct? So she's only there every other weekend kind of thing?
Exactly. So
she's not always there.
Not always there, but she remembers a number of times going there. She couldn't say if it was every weekend she went there. She can't say if a woman was downstairs, but she remembered at least 8 to 10 different times over the course of about a year. Again, she's now in her late 20s. She's trying to refer to being 6 or 7. So, calendar dates and time frames are a little cloudy, but of course she's lived with this for a number of years. And we're going back and forth on this. I'm trying to take all the details down. Then finally, she tells a story of by the way, there was a little kidnapped boy. I said, all right. So from adult women that were naked and being cut up and whatever. Yeah, my father had a hole in the basement and he could move this piece of plywood or something. And one time he did. And I looked down in the hole and there's a boy maybe a little bit younger than me with blonde hair. And he wants to come out, and I don't know what to do with this little boy. So I'm writing these down in my notes. And at this point, she broke down and started crying her eyes out. I knew to have a tissue box with me. I said, here, help yourself. I said, why don't we take a break? And we did. And she went into the lavatory and took some time there. Came back and said, look, Laura, are you still okay doing this? I said, do you want to come back another day? No, I've started. Let's keep doing this. So a few more graphic indicators of things her father did. And then she also remembered that her father owned a property in upstate Albany. So it was upstate New York, but about 100 miles from Albany. And there was a lake adjacent to the property. And she remembers going out on a rowboat with him. And first of all, he would bring these packages with him in the back of his pickup truck. They would go to this lake. And at night, they would go out in this rowboat, and he would drop these things off the side of the rowboat, and they would sink to the bottom. She is assuming they were body parts of the female victims, and who knows, even the little boy. She wasn't sure whose parts were what and where everybody wound up. I'm listening to this about maybe the 3-hour point. She definitely had enough. I said, look, we're going to have to check on this stuff. Can you give me any more dates, names, times, descriptions? She described the women, either the clothes they may have been wearing or the clothes that were left aside as being hippie type women. And, again, this is the late 60s, so it kind of made sense. So, all right, I hear you. I see you're distraught, Laura. Let's, maybe enough for today. Can we stay in touch? I may have questions over the phone. Yeah. And then, so by the way, have you told anyone else this at all? No, you're the only one I've ever told. Oh, well, except my psychologist. Oh, okay. Now I'm thinking to myself, well, if I had witnesses as a kid, I may need a psychologist too. There's nothing wrong with having a therapist or a psychologist for any reason in life. And she said, yeah, I've been seeing him the last few years in my hometown. And, oh, okay. And you told him about this? Yes. Okay. And he encouraged you to come to law enforcement? Yes. So he knows about this? Yes. I said, would you mind someday if I perhaps talk to him? I have no problem at all. I said, I'll probably need clearance from you to him, et cetera. Yeah, no problem. Okay. We'll maybe do that. So thank you, Laura. I appreciate it. You okay to go now? Oh, yeah, I feel better. This was really cathartic. Thank you, Agent Fitzgerald and Agent so-and-so. Okay, I'll be in touch. I walk her downstairs, the lobby of 26 Federal Plaza, the New York FBI office. I come back up on the elevator to the 28th floor. I walk in. All I hear is, Charlie's been shot. Charlie is one of our detectives. The bank robbery squad, they figured out they're FBI. There was a shootout in Brooklyn. Holy S. I'm not sure I can curse on your podcast or not.
We try to run a clean show.
Yeah, okay. I said, so I just threw my interview tablet aside. This was priority. Charlie Jardines, a New York City detective, a friend of mine, a guy right around my age. He had been in a shootout with a bank robber suspect, and he was shot first, but he got a few rounds off. Shot the bank robber. They were both in the street about 100 feet apart. By the time I got out there, I was assigned to go right to the hospital, and my job was to babysit the bank robber, so to speak. And I sat with him. He was handcuffed to his bed, of course, and I sat with him that whole night. And my focus completely went there. And how is Charlie doing? And we're getting updates as much as we can. Charlie did survive in the hospital for a few weeks, some serious injuries. The bank robbery suspect survived, and eventually that went to trial. He was convicted, and what have you. Charlie came back to work for a few years. But he took an early retirement. No one questioned that at all. And he's now teaching high school in New York City. So probably not right now, but obviously for the last few years, and because of the quarantine, if you're listening to this later. So, but we stayed in touch. He's a good friend. I've given some lectures to his class by Skype. They've come to visit me at Hofstra University when I teach there 1 week every year. So that's how that whole thing went. And of course, working that case for the next few weeks, rounding up some other bank robbery suspects of that crew, that was priority. So I put the Laura Crane case sort of aside. But finally, as the year changed, I sat down and put some paperwork together, and I sent some paperwork off to the Albany division as well as to the New York State Police saying, hey, you have so FBI agents in Albany as well as state police in Albany, which is their headquarters. Do you have anything at all, missing women from the mid 60s to the mid 70s, that time frame? And as by chance, a little blonde haired kid missing around that time frame, upstate New York, whatever. Sure enough, they got back to me. So, well, this is really back then was before the time of people's pictures on soap, on milk cartons and all that kind of stuff. So we didn't really have any information to go in that regard. But we certainly, but they did have a young boy who was missing, and right around 6 or 7 years of age. And we started talking about that. His name was Doug. He was 7 years old, and it was very, very. He matched the description perfectly. We just said, this is too much. This is too much to be true. And I should add in here, because I did like a 3-hour interview with the woman, and for about 2 hours of it, I assumed her father was dead because she kept talking about him in the past tense. She had not seen him since she was like 9 years of age. And next thing I know, I said, well, all right, so how long has he been gone or something? I said like that. And she said, oh, he's still alive. He lives up in, outside of Albany. What? So, and I said, well, okay, we got to put something together here. We got to start putting this case together. And we decided to consider doing, and we did a lot of records checks on this father, and we determined Larry Kane, again, not the real name, but close enough. And we decided to do some background checks on him. He had never been arrested, but kind of an odd guy. He was just living on top of a bar at this point, didn't own a car, didn't work. And, but, no real record checks. Well, we confirmed he lived back in the area. That was her father. And everything was going, was lining up. And we also found out this little boy, Doug, went missing in 1970 from his his parents' retreat at a state park. He just wandered off from their campsite, never to be seen again. And the description is exactly what of what Laura described to us. It was actually kind of, bizarre that we now had something, a little boy missing, never found, and we didn't know what it all meant to us. So we decided to start doing some independent work. We did, and we came up with an idea that why don't we get an undercover FBI agent, female, about late 20s, early 30s, to pose as Larry Crane's daughter, Laura, introduce herself to him, because father and daughter haven't been together for years, a decade and a half, I think. And we said, let's put them together and let's see what happens. We told Laura about this, and she said, no, I want to do this myself. I said, well, Laura, you already told us this really upsets you. This traumatizes you. You hate your father. You never want to see him again. Yeah, but this is different. If I can bring him to justice and bring justice to those women who were killed and even this little boy, I'm going to, I want to do this. I said, okay, if you say so. Next thing you know, my supervisor wanted to meet her and everything worked out just right. And we wound up going to Albany and with a state trooper from New York named Bob LaFountain. And we put a wire on her, a hidden Niagara recorder. And we knocked on the door. We had one of the agents from Albany pose as her husband. So when they first knocked on the door and they just went in cold because the guy had no phone. He said, oh my God, Laura, you've come back. Yes, Father, how are you? And we're listening to this because we have a transmitter too. And we're sitting in the car outside, Detective LaFountain and myself. And we're saying, man, this is really strange. Father and daughter reunion, but this guy may be a serial killer and also someone who sexually abused his daughter, which he told us, by the way, he did that also.
Now, at this point, they've been estranged for like 14 years or something like that?
Yeah, 15 years. They had not seen each other. She went from 9 years old to a grown woman. So, of course, a lot of changes. But, yeah, no contact whatsoever. She's been in touch with her mother, and she has one other sibling she stayed in touch with, but definitely not her father.
It seems, risky, doesn't it? I mean, how did you get over your boss's concerns about liability and what happens if she gets hurt? I guess having the FBI agent go in with her, the male agent, and pose as her husband offered you some element of protection for her.
You're right. And let me just back up a little bit. I also interviewed her psychologist, and on the phone, it was about a half hour, I kind of grilled him. He had full permission to talk about her issues. I didn't really want to get into her issues. I mean, she was a functional member of society, nothing Axis One, no issues in that regard. She had a full-time job and all, whatever. But he said, she has things from her childhood, and I believe her. I believe what she's saying. No, I didn't. He hadn't volunteered. I even sort of asked him that he volunteered. He didn't plant any of these ideas. She came to him fresh and brought these things up. I said, all right, if you say so. So now, but you're right, we were concerned about her safety, so we decided she's never going to be by herself with this guy. Never. So the husband went up first, fake husband, but we didn't want him being there the whole time either because we figured the father wouldn't talk with him there. So he supposedly had business, he left, but then Bob and I followed her in the car while they were walking, and then we went to the restaurant where they were, and we couldn't really hear per se, but we could see that she was safe. And we purposely said on this first visit, don't go into anything heavy duty. Just, hey, Dad, it's great to see you. Sorry I've been away. Bring him back into the fold. Let him know you're his daughter and you love him and all this stuff, which she really had problems with that. But she was doing this for a bigger cause, and she agreed to do it. That first day was nothing, but she did say, could we meet again tomorrow? And he agreed to do that. We broke that day. We kind of debriefed her, took the tape out. We listened to any parts we missed. She purposely didn't say anything. We did tell her to bring up like, I have these memories, Dad. I mean, some are great with you. Some are kind of, I just have like a fog in my brain about them. Well, we can talk about those things if you want, and all right. So that's a good sign. So the next morning they meet just for like coffee before she and her husband were supposedly going back to New York City. That was the deal. Her husband had a good job. They were wealthy, lived in New York, which of course wasn't true, but just to throw them off. Dad, can I write to you? Yeah, you can do that. They left it with that, and she did leave it with that. I have these memories from the house in the suburbs and things that happened. Yeah, I know. I think I know what you're talking about. He would always play into what she was saying. All right, well, maybe next time we can talk. Okay. She leaves this meeting, and she's really spent. She's really said, yeah, this was tougher than I thought it would be. I said, that's why we suggested an undercover female agent. Yeah, I know, but I'm with you for now. So she goes home, we go back, and we want to do another meeting. We want to drive him to his old house and drive him to the lake. And we're thinking of putting her in a rental car. She's driving, we're following. She says, I don't like driving back roads. I won't be able to think if I'm driving. He doesn't drive. He doesn't have a license. So we're saying, all right, how can we do, one of us can't just drive a car or whatever. So my supervisor was on top of this. His name's Jimmy Lyons. He just died a few years ago, retired also. He said, well, you know about the drug limo, right? I said,
I love this. This is amazing.
Yeah, what's a drug limo?
Well,
drug limo.
Well, the FBI, even though the DEA is mostly charged with working drug cases, the FBI does too. And in the last few years, they confiscated a pretty sharp-looking stretch limo from some drug group, and that was now the FBI drug limo. And it even had a screen that went up and down, so if the driver can be separate from the people in the back while what they're talking about. And it so happens the car has been wired for sound. So we can put the tape recorder in the trunk. The mics are hidden. We just turn it. I can actually control the buttons as the driver. We said, this is a great idea. So we ran it by Laura. She said, yeah, I can do that. So we waited for the Albany winter to go by, but it was about March or so of the next year. I think this would have been around 90, maybe 92 at this point, 1992. I drive up. She flies into Albany. We meet. Pull up in front of the bar, where the father lives upstairs. He comes out, well, you and your husband really must be rich. I mean, little did he know it was the FBI drug limo, and they weren't quite that wealthy. They get in the back, and I can hear everything because I have like an earpiece in, but they think they have privacy. I mean, Laura knows she's being listened to, but he doesn't. And they're going back and forth and talking this. So the first stop was the house, which was sold years ago, where allegedly the murders took place in the basement. And we pulled right up. Of course, we researched in advance, what was there, what have you. And we pull up. Oh, Dad, you remember the house? Oh, yeah, that's the old house. All right. Yeah, they painted the garage door, and there used to be a tree there. Yeah, I remember that tree. And this is the first time. Dad, I remember things happening in the basement. Yeah. Things happen in the basement. All right. Well, I mean, they were kind of bad things, Dad.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mind Over Murder. You can listen to Mind Over Murder on any of your favorite podcast platforms. And a reminder that we're a new podcast, and we very much appreciate your subscriptions and your kind comments and reviews.
Thank you so much for listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.